Welcome back to the podcast. I'm thrilled to have Richard Spaulding with me. Richard is a good friend. He's the president of Universal Asset Management. He's in Memphis right now. People know Universal Asset Management, UAM, as one of the premier aftermarket services providers. Deals a lot in the aircraft parts arena, airline support, and we're going to talk about aircraft values, the market, where things are now and where it's going. And it's going to be a great conversation. So Richard, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Craig, thank you very much for having me. I really look forward to this conversation.
So what's happening in the market? It's a little bit of you and I were chatting a little off before we hit record. The market, COVID kind of disrupted it for a while, but it really hasn't disrupted it. But, I suspect a tidal wave is coming.
I agree that the market, let's just start with the pre-pandemic situation that we saw, right? Pre-pandemic, the sky was blue, everything was rosy, right? Everything was good. So values were high. People were paying quite a bit of money for airframes. We saw it here at UAM. We were in that market. We bought quite a few airframes back in 2018 and 19 and the beginning of 2020. Hindsight, would I like to go back and trade out those 2020 airplanes that I bought? The airframes? Yeah, I think I would like to do that. But when you look at the fact that the pandemic comes and all of the airplanes that start to get parked, you and I off air, we were talking about the number of airplanes that are parked on the ground and what effect is that going to have. So when you see what has transpired over the last year and a half and the number of airplanes that are parked, you have to think that those are going to have that is going to have an impact on the value of airplanes. And I'll say airplanes as a whole, not just airframes, but airplanes as a whole. And we're seeing that today at UAM. Our business has been off around 65% in terms of our revenues from year over year. And that's a big number to have to swallow. And that is, airlines aren't buying, OEMs and MROs aren't buying for feedstock or for parts to sit on the shelf. Everybody can't afford that anymore. So we're seeing that today. So when I start to see that effect and what it does now in the market, we're looking at valuations of airframes probably in the same kind of, I'll call it 35 to 40%, 50% lower than they were pre-pandemic. So where am I going with this? To your point is, when I see all of this dynamic in the marketplace and the changes that are taking place and the value degradation that is taking place compared to pre-pandemic, and then I hear about deals that are being done at pre-pandemic levels, I have a real disconnect that I think the market's trying to figure out, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. So that's one of the big things that I'm looking at when I look at values. Because I look at values from the bottom up. I don't look at it. We talked about this just a minute ago, Greg, where we got values from appraisers, right? That's a good number. You can give it to a bank or somebody and say, here's what they think. And it's all predicated upon a willing seller, willing buyer, the whole deal. But I look at it another way. I look at it and say, what's the value of this asset at the end of its term? And then kind of work my way up from there. Does it have a lease? Can it have a lease extension, 3 years to get it to part out, things like that. And I'm not able to put my head around how people can start to pay or continue to pay pre-pandemic pricing when the values of assets have declined like they are.
It's interesting. Like, I talk to people, and the narrow body market has essentially held up. The values of the narrow body airplanes, the new gen 737s, the A320s, 321s, they've held up pretty well so far. But
they have, but let me say this again. There's a lot of airplanes that are still parked on the ground that have nothing, as you and I have talked about, nothing has happened to them yet, right? They're parked. They're waiting to see what's going to happen to them. So when you start to look at the order book of the Neo and the Max, and you look at the number of airplanes that are parked, are those 737 NGs or older A320 COs and 321 COs, are they actually going to go back in the air? That's where I think you and I will see kind of a dynamic that'll change in terms of the values.
Yeah, there's great, not an industry secret, but great Wall Street Journal article not too long ago was talking about Airbus was, hey, look, you ordered it. We built it. You're taking it. No, we're not deferring. We're not deferring. And they held the line.
Correct.
And okay, so you got new airplanes going out, new airplanes rolling off the assembly line. They're going somewhere. You've got older airplanes that are, sitting either waiting for a new home or whatever. So now you've got this market that's getting, new airplane, new Max deals. I've heard them. Can't confirm it because I've only heard it, but I've heard it in enough places that I believe it. Under $40 million.
And then you start to compare that with, as you and I talked, the lease rate, being, comparable to a CO, a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old CO, or a 737 NG. And are they really going to say, oh, I'm going to keep the 737 NG or get an NG or a CO when I could get a Neo or a Max for roughly the same price in terms of a lease rate? And as you said, as we've talked before, then you get into the fuel burn savings and all that. And all of a sudden you're like, why would I go and take an older airplane when I can take a brand new airplane? And I got, not only that, I've got the warranty issues and all the other things that I can take advantage of in the first 1 or 2 years or 3 years. So I really, the dynamic and what I'd like, we are talking about the narrow body, right? Because the wide body, we can talk about that in a second. That's just a whole nother, that's a whole nother elephant in the room, as we say.
Yeah.
but on the narrow body, it's going to be interesting because those are, like you said, those airplanes have to go somewhere, right? The ones coming off the line. Boeing, Airbus are not going to stand back and say, "Oh, okay, I'm going to lower my production. I'm going to stop putting airplanes out the door." So, what always gets me a telltale sign of how that's getting pushed into the market is when you start to see the leasing companies, some of the bigger leasing companies, start to lease airplanes to airlines you and I have never heard of.
Mm-hmm.
When in the old day, right, pre-pandemic and what have you, would we really see some of the bigger guys leasing an 8-year-old airplane to a startup in some small nation, right?
Yep.
We wouldn't see that. What we're seeing now, though, is that these guys are getting pushed, right? Pushed down. So, like you said, they're dumping all the new airplanes in and say, here, you're taking these, right? Airlines, lessors. Now, these guys they got an airplane coming off lease. Oh, it's a 10-year-old airplane, was on a 10-year lease. What am I going to do with it? I got to go find a place to put it. Well, now they're putting those 10-year-old airplanes, instead of putting it back at, let's say, a Lufthansa or an Air France, those 10-year-old airplanes are going to the second and sorry.
I had to throw that one out there. That's exactly, that's where it's going. I mean, it's like, so he said, it's a great time to start an airline. You can get cheap airlines and cheap capital and there you go.
And you get decent airplanes. Whereas before you were looking at I got a 20-year-old A320. I got to worry about maintenance, the engines. Now I get a 10-year-old airplane. So it's just so that is the dilemma that I see, is that those airplanes that are parked, where are they going to go? And at some point, they're going to get monetized. And when they get monetized, I believe that's going to have a detrimental effect on the overall end value of these assets.
So that's a question. So, I follow the stock market. I look at Air Lease and I look at AirCap and your publicly traded, leasing companies. I'm like, I know Gus Kelly took $1 billion write down maybe a year ago.
Yep.
During COVID, he's like, hey, okay, but that's 10 airplanes. I mean, that's, like that, $1 billion is, that's 10 airplanes, maybe. Okay, 15 737s, great. He's got 1,000 of it. And now he's got GCAS coming in. I'm like, what point does he have to do a mark to market accounting and say, all right, hey, look, a lot of this stuff I got is junk.
Well,
A330 A330s are what? 15, I'm hearing 15, 20 million bucks for an
oh,
A330 right now.
yeah. Oh yeah. A330. I mean, values have, have dropped 30 to 45%. I mean, it's crazy. And I think, and listen, I will never, those guys are smart guys, right?
Oh yeah, brilliant.
All those big guys are smart guys, right? And I'm not gonna say that they're, gonna have to take this big write down. I think right now, what is happening is what I've always been told, because I haven't worked at an air cap or whatever, but what they have done is they continue to put them back out on lease to continue to have them operating so they're not sitting on the ground. Now, I don't know if that's the case today, right? In terms of, I haven't gone to look at AirCap's portfolio to say how many airplanes are sitting on the ground or not. But as long as you keep on thinking that there is a market there and that airplane can continue to fly, that can gets kicked down the road, right? It just, it's not sitting there and saying, oh, I've got 30 of them sitting on the ramp and I can't do anything with them. As long as they continue to find a home for them, even if it's, I'll say, even if it's a PBH or a very low lease rental, it's operating, it's not aircraft on ground to AOG. So they kind of kick that can down the road in terms of marking it to market.
Right.
I don't think he had any option last year because of what was seen kind of right away, that even the airplanes that were in the market and flying, the values were dropping. So I think like you said, the A330s were, you saw that rock just going to the bottom. So I think he had to make that decision, and I think it was the right decision for him. Right? He showed his investors that he's trying to be on top of things, and I think that was the right decision.
Yeah, look, he's probably the smartest guy in aviation. I mean, quite frankly, I mean, it's like I'm not going to argue with that. And I'm not an accountant, and I'm not a gap guy, and I'm not a CFO, and I just but it's like a dilemma. You go, wow, this guy's got 1,500 airplanes now, plus he's got the GCAS portfolio that they're bringing in, and that's a big elephant to swallow. And
so I think to that point, and this is not just about AirCap, but let's put all of the big lessors in that bucket, that their deal is two things, right? Trade. They have to trade assets. That's one of their big pieces, that they have to trade assets. And two, and then putting aircraft that are coming off lease back on lease. So they assume that they have an airplane that they put on lease for 10 years. They then assume that it has another 5-year lease and another 3-year lease.
Right.
That's where it gets a little tricky, right? Because when we start to see airplanes that are being retired at kind of 14 and 15 years old, how long is that next lease period there? Is it really 8 to 10 years? Is it 5 years? That's where it's going to get tricky. So then what happens to me is you don't get far enough down the curve on the value, right, to be able to make up this, what we're seeing in terms of this degradation in value. If you can keep kicking the can down the road and get it out on lease for 5 years, another 3 years, another 3 years, you finally get to the point where you've written the thing off and it's down to nothing, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
At that point, you don't care. So that you just dovetailed into the dilemma that I see, is that useful life of the airplane. Somebody can still tell me that the useful life of an airplane is 20, 25 years. That's fine. But what is the real actual useful life when somebody's going to lease that airplane from you? Is it now 15, 16, 17 years? Because as I said, we're seeing a lot of airplanes that are coming to market. I mean, there's a dime a dozen airplanes being shown to us, 2006 vintage, that airframes are going to part out. They're taking the engines and they're trying to lease the engine somewhere else and do something like that. ACS, right? ACS has done a great job with their business plan and what they tried, their model. And we've got those vintages being shown to us all the time.
Yeah, look, the freighter market, look, the 737-800 freighter market's on fire right now. The A321 freighter market is picking up. A lot of people looking at that. Look, I think just e-commerce in itself whacked out supply chains coming out of China. Those airplanes will probably be in a lot of demand. It's MRO capacity and the ability to cut the doors in and do the mods. It's holding that up right now.
I think they will. At some point, though, I think they'll get to a cap. I can't tell you when that's going to be, but I do think there'll be a point in time where they'll get to the limit. But as you said, right now, 737-800, cargo market conversion market's great. A321, like you said, is on getting online. 767s, right? Everybody's looking for 767s to convert. So that market. But how much can that market actually consume out of the number of airplanes that are going to be on the ground is really the issue, right? It's not 100%, but it might be, I don't know, 20, 30, 40%. You'd have to see, but that is going to suck up some of the capacity of these airplanes that are sitting on the ground. But I think in the long run, there's going to be a heart to heart at some point. On some of these transactions.
Hey, look, I just think the marketing guys at the leasing companies are gonna have to work a little harder. It's
I think some of them. I know some of them work really hard now, but yeah, they do. But I think they're gonna be working a little bit harder, like you said, and I think a little bit more creative in terms of it's not as going to be easy as I've got a 10-year-old airplane I want to give to Lufthansa and. Okay, fine, we can do that, but it's going to be, we're going to find ways and find places to be creative and put airplanes out on lease.
Yeah. Hey, look, I remember 20 years ago seeing there was an airplane on the ground. Nobody wanted it. Nobody could sell it. And they finally came up and said, first guy to sell this gets 50,000 cash delivered to him in suitcases. A week later, the airplane was gone. And then 50,000 cash was delivered in a suitcase.
Yeah,
it's amazing what a little money motivation will do, right? So.
Yeah, that's very familiar to my dad was in the business for a long time and was part of the ISTAT family and what have you. And he spent some time with Mr. Hazy down in certain places in Mexico and what have you. And yes, there were some very interesting things, like you said, that took place back in those days with suitcases.
Yep, exactly. So let's talk about your world a little bit. So you guys have been around for a long time, and Universal's had a great reputation in the parts market. One of your competitors just got bought.
They did.
And you guys see some more consolidation. What's happening in that arena?
Well,
are you guys able to still get the financing? I mean, how's the financing for how are the banks holding up as far as loaning out money and
so for us right now, we can rely on our parent, right? China Aircraft Leasing. We can rely on our parent for money that we may need for various projects. We do have the ability to go to a local bank if we need to. But right now, we've been primarily focused, just because of what we talked about in terms of the difference in valuations. We've been focused on trying to get consignment programs into our facility. One of the key things that is unique about UAM is we basically have our own disassembly facility that is not at a Ascent or AirSail or Victorville or Goodyear, any of that stuff. We have it in Tupelo. It's not the ideal place, but we have it in Tupelo. We have our own team that can control our own disassembly. So we're a big partner with United. United is one of our major customers. We disassemble, I won't say all, but quite a few of their airplanes that they're looking to disassemble and put into retirement. So right now we've got 3 737 on our ramp. We've got 5 A320s on our ramp that are going through different stages of disassembly. Those are from United. And so we're keeping busy, but we'd like to be busier. We haven't bought anything, as I said, until beginning of 2020 was the last time we actually purchased an asset. We've put some bids out on them recently, but there's still a disconnect between the bid and the ask, just because there are other people out there, I think, taking a stronger view on the future of the market. We have we have our system here where we track parts sales, quotes. I mean, so we have real-time information as it relates to what we think parts are worth.
Mhm.
I'm not saying it's any different than anybody else, but we think we have a pretty good idea of what we think parts are trading for, and we're not being competitive based on some other people that are trying to bid on some of these assets. And so we're not going to chase the market. We're going to wait and see. But we are willing to help others in terms of their consignment programs that we offer. I think I told you a couple of weeks ago, we got a 777-300 ER on our ramp that came out of Jet. So we're in the process of disassembling that, and got a few good things off of that are in the process to be sold. So that'll be a good program for us.
When do we start to see the first 787 being disassembled? That's the question everybody wants to know right now. When's the first 787 come in for disassembly?
I don't think it's too far off. I think it's, I think I mentioned to you, I knew about the 787s coming out of Norwegian.
Yep.
And I mentioned that to you, that, those airplanes had, a large number of parts that were not on the airplane. And when you start looking at,
right.
Large number of parts, and when you look at that value, you're trying to figure out, we're not talking, 5 million, we're talking, 3 or 4 times that, right? And all of a sudden, what you're going to put that back into service. Well, that owner had better be pretty sure that he's got a place to put it and get a pretty good value for it if he's going to reinvest that type of money into his investment that he already had at Norwegian when he put it there. So those things, I couldn't give you the crystal ball exactly when, but I do believe that a 787 is going to be fairly soon in terms of going through a disassembly.
That's crazy, isn't it?
It is. You would never think about it that way, right? Never.
Yeah, no. Well, look, I think about that. I mean, I'm old now. I think about the 787 or the 777s. They were just getting certified in the mid '90s. Like, hey, this thing's cool, and all of a sudden you see them. 10 years later, they started getting torn down at 10 years or 10 years old. You're like, wow, that's
yeah.
crazy.
I mean, the 777-300 ER we have is 12 years old, 2008 vintage, right? And that thing, I mean, go do the calculation of how much that cost, 12 years, and it's in part out. I'm not so sure that the investors really, the equity who's no longer there, right, thought that would ever happen and what have you. So that's something that is a dynamic that we're dealing with. Right now, we've got, to go back to your A300, A330 market, we've got parts that we bought A330s back over 19 and 20, and we've got 330 material that is pretty much, very hard to move, obviously, because those airplanes are sitting on the ground, a lot of them. I mentioned to you the market that I think is really there is the 747 market because of the cargo, right? If you 747 400 material is really in demand, and it's, you got the guys flying the cargo, flying the heck out of their airplanes. So that market is really done well for us. We just parted out 3 of them for United, and the program has done quite well for us.
That's the interesting. That's where some of the opportunities are. I was talking to some guys now. They're repairing old CF6 -50s and PW4000s. They're like, hey, look, we see the market. The market is it's a niche for us. You got operators in Europe. You've got operators that are flying 1 or 2 of these airplanes, in their fleet, and they need engine parts.
And so that's the key, right? The key, as you said, I mean, I know a few of them that have their niche, right? They have their niche in certain assets, and if they can keep their pulse on that, then they can be the ones that can make it through and do quite well. When you start to get dynamic and start going outside and growing this, you don't have a focus on one thing, and that's what we've tried to do here. Is we've tried to basically kind of pull things in and say, what do we really want to focus on? What do we think we need to really look at? And so are we really going to chase somebody that's offering a 18-year-old 757 for sale? No, because I mean, not to say the market's not there, but we have 3 of them on our ramp, right? We're disassembling 3 of them. We don't need those. Can we? Do we want to look at A321s, by all means, we want to look at A320s, just like everybody else does. But
Mhm.
we'll look at it in two lights. We'll look at it in whether we want to part it out if we can get it for that value, or our parent company, Calc, would like to look at that in a conversion type program.
Mhm.
So that's where we kind of have a little bit of extra oomph, because we can look at the 321s and say, okay, we can either do this or we can do this, and let's figure out where we are relative to the buyer's expectation or seller's expectations, and then we'll figure out what we can do.
Yeah, I love, it's a guy out in California, is a good friend of mine, or actually in Portland, Oregon. He's got 15 MD-87s that they use for fire, during fire season.
Yep.
And he's like, yeah, we bought them for like nothing. I mean, literally, nothing. And he's like, but they're the best airplane in the world, and we want more. Now the question, he's like, where do we do, where are we going to get the engines? They can buy you can get a whole bunch of JT8Ds right now, but they calendar out. You can't pickle them
Correct.
forever. It's like, he's
Yep.
like, yeah, that's going to be I'll be retired, but that's going to be something, that's going to be somebody else's problem, but that's going to be an issue. And he's like, we don't know what the next airplane, due to CG and just conversion capability, whatever else. The MD-87s are phenomenal airplanes. So
Well, you get guys like that. You get the guys that are dealing, I'll be honest, that are taking, still have 727s or 737-300s in Africa, right?
yep.
They're doing the same thing, right? They got a niche market. They're putting them in there, and then they keep on trying to find, as you said, the parts, the engines to support that operation. And once you get it into a place like that, do you really think it's going to come out? It's probably not going to come out.
No.
They probably have nothing into it, so they're just cashing a check every month and trying to support it the best they can. So yeah, and the niche markets like that, and those guys can do quite well if they find that right niche.
So where are the opportunities? I mean, the market's probably gonna be a little log jammed for a while.
Yeah.
But the airlines will start to fly again. I mean, Europe is gonna, look, if you think we had cabin fever in the United States this summer, I can't wait to see Europe next summer.
Yeah, but our opportunities for us are going to be, we're out, I should say, looking to assist the airlines in their retirement programs, right? We're trying to figure out how can we be assistance to them, because as you look at them, people are doing RFPs and all that, and we're trying to find ways in without the RFPs, right? Because we can go in and offer to do things on their inventory. We can do things on assets that they might want to retire. We can be their partner on that. So that's the opportunities that we're trying to follow up on. And we've got quite a bit of, I say, interest. I'm not going to sit here and brag and say we got a lot, but I mean, there are people that are coming to us looking at programs that we want to try to put in place. And the tie-in that we have is that we're using our big brother at Calc to help us as well, because they have the relationships with the airlines that they deal with in the market where they're leasing airplanes. So we're trying to put a tie-in together there where we can be an assistance to Calc as well when they go to place airplanes. So that's a little dynamic for us that we like to kind of try and figure out how we can get into an airline and play in that field with Calc's assistance, because they're putting new airplanes on lease there.
Is there a way to, I mean, obviously the parts market is sort of semi-transactional. A lot of people have tried to get into power by hour type stuff, but that gets, that's not for the faint of heart either. Is there any way that you can take the lumpiness out of the transactional part sales and make it programmatic, or does that just get really, really complicated?
I wish I could, right? I mean, that would be great. But I think, to your point, there are people that have tried to do that and are doing that through, as you said, the Power by the Hour program. What does that mean, though? That's capital intensive, right? You have to have a lot of parts on the shelf. You have to, the management of it. I mean, when I was at one of the OEMs that I worked for back in the day at Fairchild Dornier, we had airplanes that we were taking back out of PSA Airlines back in the day. and people, this will date us if people know, oh, who are those guys? But anyway, what we did as a manufacturer was we did exactly that. We put the airplanes into United and we provided a manufacturer's PBH program.
Okay.
All I can say is that the administration of that program was a complete headache. And thank goodness we were with a manufacturer, because we had to go, there was a lot of lumpiness there, because there's a lot of, as I said, investment that we had to put into our, what do we need to have on the shelf? Because what's the shelf life of, or the on-wing time of life of this part or whatever, so that we know what we're going to have. So there's a lot that goes into that planning process.
It's a lot of data. What about Boeing? Boeing Global Services. 5 years, the meteoric rise of Boeing Global Services, and they've been awful quiet lately. Have they learned their lesson that this here parts market is not as easy as they wanted to think?
Well, let me ask you this: how well known how well known do you think that program is worldwide in terms of? I don't think a lot of, I say a lot of people, I don't hear a lot of talk about it. Like you said, it's kind of quiet, right? What does that mean? Does that mean that it's not doing well, or does that mean they're trying to do stuff under the radar? They had that program in place. I can tell you, going back to the Norwegian deal and some of the airplanes there, they had their Gold Care program in place, right? What I question on that program is, I believe it has to go the term for them to make money. You understand? They're not making money just on the first year or the first two. They're making money on the term of that program. So that program has to go long term in order for that program to make money for Boeing. That's my take. They're not just making a dime here and there every time they have to do something, because again, they're investing in the parts and what they need to do to support that program. So it's the same thing with the engine provider. When the engine manufacturers give the airlines certain engine programs, right? GE's notorious for it, right? GE looks at the program and says, I think there's so many engine overhauls that are going to happen in this period. And based on that, I'm going to charge you this. Well, if you come back to them and say, oh, I want to cut it short by 2 years, and it takes out a couple of engine overhauls, they go, oh, no, wait a minute. We got to reprice the whole deal, because I was counting on that revenue from the last 2 or 3 shop visits.
Well, that's what crushed. You think about GE Aviation during COVID. I mean, you think about what crushed it is, they had so many power by hour agreements out there, and then all of a sudden nobody's flying. They're like, whoa, where's our money?
There's no cash flow, so that's a little difficult. I totally
exactly. And they were all. I was talking to them all at the G, and they're like, oh my God, we don't know what we're panicked. So and then you think about the craftiness, and this is what I always, this is what I love about our industry is you've got the craftiness of smaller people who can get in and out of deals. They know. They're only buying APUs, or they're only buying certain part numbers. And it's like, hey, look, I don't want to deal in everything, but I just want to be an expert in, I'll carry $20-30 million of inventory on my shelves, and that's it. And I'll turn it 4 or 5 times a year, and I'll make my money. And that's a very simple model that it's hard to compete against.
And that's something that, when you start to see some of the companies, our company, for instance, when I got here, we've done every model you can imagine, right? You name it. I still have MD-80 material. I still have old 747 material. I mean, I've got all sorts of material in our warehouse. And so when you see that, right, we didn't focus on one type or one series. We got one of everything, right? And we try to look at it that way, and that's fine. It's worked for UAM. That's fine. But I do believe, like you said, the guys that want to take that focus and be extra careful in what they look at, how they buy it, and they start to get a handle on what the market is and what the market demand is for those parts, is exactly what you're saying. those guys can be quite lucrative in their venture, because once you get a pulse on that market and know exactly, when are parts going to come due, how long do they stay on wing, and you start to look at the market and understand that I have those parts, they have that little niche they can do quite well.
So there's, you guys are data. I mean, data has got to play a huge part in your business.
That's everything to us, right? I mean, data, our business development team, as I said, tracks quotes, sales, you name it, anything that has to do with part values.
Mhm.
We track all of that and we put it all into our system. And then I have an analyst that basically, he does a great job for me, that basically goes through that. We have a master control list that he basically updates.
Mhm.
And so he basically can show the trading trend pre-pandemic on parts. And then he has now what's happened over the last year and a half, so that we know, and we have to explain this obviously to our management, right? Our parent company in Hong Kong, to say this part traded for this pre-pandemic, but look, we've seen the minimal trades that have taken place are here, and here's what the value is. And this is why we think this part should trade at X minus Y today, because this is the trend that we're seeing. So data it's all about data for us. And I'm trying, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm interrupt you.
No. I was just saying it's all about data, and keeping that data current is critical, right? Making sure that we have current information in there. And I'll be honest, I mean, there'll be times where we get parts. As I said, we've got all sorts of stuff back in the warehouse. Somebody calls up for an erroneous part, and we go, oh, well, we have it. And then we try to figure out, what is it worth to quote it? And we gotta go digging, because part hasn't traded for a year or 2 years or whatever. So we have to go dig and try to figure out what we think it's worth. But that drives everything.
People have talked about blockchain coming into the parts market. Is it real? Is it a wish? Is it something that's 5 years away, 10 years away? No, never, type of deal?
I laugh because our parent company, Calc, that was one of the things that they've been looking at and are looking at. I got to be honest, I'm not personally involved in it, but I'm involved in it in the sense that they've asked me for values of certain components. And then we're trying to figure out, how do we put that component, and we're talking more of the bigger components, let's say the landing gear or the APU or something, and say, how do we basically use blockchain technology to finance that, or sell it, or come up with a program through blockchain that can be value added to that, to our business relative to those components.
Right.
So I don't have the answer to it, Craig, but the people, I can tell you, the people in our home office in Hong Kong are definitely looking at it.
It's getting a lot of attention. I mean, I've getting a lot of attention, but it's like a lot of these funny airplane pictures you see, the hypersonic, whatever is coming, it'll be, I'm like, well, okay, build it, and then we'll talk about it.
So that I couldn't tell you how it's going to work. I just know that there are people smarter than I have ideas about how they think it can make it work. And so, we'll see if it comes to fruition. Great. And it can be of assistance to our business. That'd be great.
So let's shift gears, and we'll make this kind of the final thing. We'll go. All right. So we got your 737s and A321s, A320s are going to be the staple of the narrow body market. I suspect the A220 and the E-jets will probably get some more attention down the road. But for the most part, I think the A320, 321, or the MAX and the A321 are going to be the staple in the narrow body market. The wide body market, is it the 787 and the A350, or what? So when we do see the world come back, which it will, where do you focus to get an early run on the future opportunities?
So I'm going to start at the lower end, right where you were started, because I do believe that you've got the A220, you've got the E195, E175. I mean, those assets, I think you've seen it in the last year and a half, have played a critical role, right, for the airlines, especially for us in the US, right? I've traveled pretty much throughout since kind of middle of last year, coming back and forth to Memphis and what have you. And when you go to fly on United, when you fly up until recently, you fly Washington to Chicago, Chicago to Memphis, or to Houston and then to Memphis. You're flying a 170 or it is that airplane filled a void they can't put a big airplane on it because the demand wasn't there. Now they're backfilling now with 737-900s or whatever where they can on the major routes. But those airplanes, I think, will continue to see a good bit of demand over the next 2 to 3 to 5 years. And because I think the airline saw the value, and the people, the passengers had no issues, right? They put out United's changed their airplanes to put out a pretty good product with those airplanes, even the CRJ 900, where they do a little deal, put the first class in and all that. It's a decent product. So going to you said it right, mainstay in the narrow body side, A320s, 737 Maxes and what have you. On the wide body side, I got to stick with, as you said, pretty obviously, I think you look at 787, A350. I think the 777 is going to stay in there and play a role, because I do think it has a role that it can play for the people that already have the investment in that asset. So I think the Uniteds of the world, who have quite a few of them, I think you're going to see that airplane stay and maintain a certain role in the marketplace. 767s, I think, are going to, they're going to slowly kind of fall off and end up going to the cargo market or whatever. But I do think it's going to be, the 787, the A350, and which is obvious, and but the 777, I think, is going to continue to have a role to play, especially, as I said, for the ones that have a major investment in that asset today.
Do people start finding and looking for cheap A330s and just saying, hey, look, they're so cheap, why not?
If you have, now that goes, yes. The problem with that is you're then going to go down to the second. I think you're going to go to the second and third tier carrier that's going to be looking for that opportunity to get that on the cheap. I think you got the majors that are kind of, I don't want to say stuck, but the majors got their orders with the 787s, the A350s, 777s. So they're kind of stuck there. But I think on the A330, I think some of the second and third tier carriers will have opportunities to find cheap lift that will do them right. I think it'll work for them. So I think it's not a bad opportunity if you're looking for some wide body lift, that you can go out and find some decent wide body lift. And to that extent, I'm not naming names, but somebody I heard recently, a fund went out and bought a couple of A330s on the fly, just to say, I think it's going to come back. I think there's going to be a need for that airplane, and they're basically bought them and they're letting them sit. And if somebody needs one, they can raise their hand and say, here, we'll lease it to you. So
it's a lot of money out there. It's a lot of money chasing airplane deals right now. And I think that's what's holding up a lot of the values. And it's
well, just before we get off, just to say, we talked about the ABS market, right? There are a lot of people, a lot of entities chasing money, seeing that they think they can put an ABS, they can go out and put a portfolio together that they can then turn into an ABS. They can make a little juice on the front. They got it there, they put it in, and they're happy, and then they go try and do another one. So they're putting that money to work. They're, the funds are going to, looking to say, hey, you know what, I'll take a 6 to 8% return, no problem. Let's just go forward, get the money deployed. And so that, to your point, I think those are propping up the values, because, to be honest with you, you've seen it, right? You see the valuation in the prospectus, right, for these ABSs, right? And you look at those valuations, and it's just like, we talked about values in books, right? Well,
Yeah, like you said, I'm just a firm believer in, what's the value of something? That's what's the next. It's only what the next guy is willing to pay for it. Yeah, you can appraise things all day long, and like, well, hey, look, it's market value and real value. Yeah, appraised value and real value are completely separate items. When do
Exactly.
you start to think? I mean, obviously now, vaccines are rolling out. Scott Kirby is mandated, everybody at United get the vaccine. And so maybe more employers are going to do that, and the world starts to get back to normal. When do are you bullish on the future? What do you think what do you think it looks like in 2022, 2023?
I'm bullish on the region, the local market, the U.S., the domestic market, right? Because I think people are just going to continue. I mean, I see it today when I fly. I mean, the airplanes are full. People are through the airport. It's there. The issue that I have is, which is a killer for the airlines, right? Is the wide body market, the overseas market. I don't have an answer on how that's gonna get fixed with everything that we see, all of the disconnects. You see it. I mean, just go to Europe, right? Europe, even the EU, every country has a different requirement, right? Even though they're in the EU, every country has its own requirement, or it's going to come up with its own. Oh, you got to be quarantined for 7 days, 14 days, whatever it's going to be. I find it really hard how people are going to start to make plans to travel for business when they don't. I mean, we can't afford that, right? You got to go quarantine for 14 days. It's not going to be. It's not feasible. So that's where. I think it's another year before that starts to really see that it's going to somehow sort itself out.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's been the major headache, is you don't know the rules. China is different from Australia, which is different from Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. You're like, all right, I don't know the rules, so I'm just not going to go. I'll figure it out.
And Craig, you know this. I mean, we travel for business, right? We travel for a living. And what do? We don't normally fly from, let's say from LA to Hong Kong for 1 day and then turn around and come back. We normally say we're going to go to LA to Hong Kong, then we're going to go from Hong Kong to Singapore, then we're going to go to Singapore to Australia. You're going to try and make that trip worthwhile. Same thing when we go to Europe, right? We're going to try and make that worthwhile. You can't. How do you figure that out today?
You can't. It's you got your vaccine passport, and that's all you can do. And you can pray. You're like, let me in.
Yeah,
it's cold out here.
Yeah, exactly.
I got you.
So it's going to be tough, but I think it's going to take another year for that whole thing to sort out. And as we know, I mean, historically saying, airlines don't really make their money in the domestic side, right? They make their money on the overseas travel and the wide bodies flying to Europe and to Asia. So.
I guess maybe they'll get creative. I guess we'll start to get creative. Look, I honestly think maybe they start to find some pricing power. I mean, it's the airplanes are full. People want to travel. You saw the schedules this summer. Spirit Airlines meltdown and all the other stuff. And you're like, hey, look, maybe fuel prices aren't going to come down. Maybe they get a little bit of pricing power in there. I don't know.
I think just based on my little experience that I've had, in the domestic travel, I'm starting to see that a little bit right now in terms of you can go and if you really get ahead of the curve and look at your ticket. But if you're going to walk up and you're leaving in the next couple of days and you go to buy a ticket, that ticket's quite a bit more expensive than if you could plan ahead.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Good.
So,
hey, Richard, thanks for coming on today.
Craig, I really appreciate it. It was enjoyable and really enjoy talking with you and talking about the market.
And I'm looking forward to having you back, because when the market starts to turn, we're going to talk about where the real opportunities are and how everybody's going to make money hand over fist.
Let's do it. Absolutely.
Sounds great. How do people get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me at R Spaulding. That's RSPAULDING at UAMinc.com. And just send me an email. Anybody want, and the website, UAMinc.com. So they can get a hold of me anytime. And if anybody has any questions, love to talk to you.
Awesome. Hey, thank you for coming on. Enjoyed it.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Greg.
hope you enjoyed the latest edition of the Aerospace Executive Podcast. You can reach out to me directly, Craig at northstaresg.com, or check us out at www.northstaresg.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or on YouTube. Just do a search for Aerospace Executive Podcast. Thanks again. I'm Craig Pickett.